Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 5th annual Black Male Media Project with the National Association of Black Journalists of South Florida. We are extremely excited for this event because it's been a long time in the making. This is an event that the National Association of Black Journalists, we have in our chapters throughout the entire country on the first Saturday of June every single year. And we've been doing it for 5 years so far. And today is no different. So we are excited about this event. The National Association of Black Journalists is on a mission to inspire Black men. That's why the organization created this nationwide project. And it's an initiative designed to change the way Black men are viewed in society and attract more brothers to work in the media. And I'm super pumped for this conversation. And now I want each and every one of you who are watching right now to go on Facebook and share this video. Share this video from our NABJ-South Florida Facebook page, because the information that you're going to receive, the conversations we're going to have, and the stories that will be told are so great, we can't keep it to ourselves. So I'd love for you all to just start to share the video on Facebook with your friends and family and followers as well. Okay, and so as we are, as you are sharing your video, I'm going to put a 3-minute timer on as you all are sharing. All right. Beautiful. Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing the video. I hope that you all were able to share the live feed. So allow me to jump right into letting you all know what the event is about. And as a matter of fact, before I do that, we actually have some very, very special words from Russell Motley, who was a former NABJ-South Florida president, and he's currently the treasurer. And he also does incredible work in the community as the editor-in-chief of Legacy Magazine. And he has so many more accomplishments. And he's also a professor at South Florida's only HBCU, Florida Memorial University. So he's going to bring greetings and welcome on behalf of our NABJ South Florida president, Juwan Strader.
Hey, a great Saturday afternoon. Thanks a lot, Jefferson. As you mentioned, I am the immediate past president of NABJ South Florida. Our current president, Juwan Strader, regrets he cannot be with us today. So I send you greetings on behalf of him and our entire executive board. Now, the Black Male Media Project has become an annual event that I look forward to because it's an opportunity to examine our images in the media. How are we being portrayed? How are we being represented? In graduate school at FAMU, I researched how Blacks are portrayed in the media, and the results of my research were both alarming and disturbing. No, we are not fairly portrayed in the media. But what's worse is that research suggests that how the world views Black men through the lens of the media is what the world believes. Again, how the world views Black men through the media is exactly what the world believes. So we as journalists have a social responsibility to report an accurate account of who Black men are, and Black women for that matter, to dispel those stereotypes. And events like today, which are happening right now throughout the entire country, are bringing attention to this. So thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to hearing the discussion and then coming up with some great solutions. Jefferson?
Thank you. That was excellent. And I appreciate you putting all of what we're doing into perspective. That was very clean and concise. So thank you very much, Russell Motley. All right, beautiful. And so the National Association of Black Journalists actually provided a video for us to share in order to frame the conversation we are having. As you all know, we are reflecting on the relationship between Black men and law enforcement 1 year after the death of George Floyd. So I'm going to share a video from our national organization that they asked us to share throughout the country.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sam Ford, a reporter at WJLA-TV in Washington. Nearly half a century ago, I was the youngest of 44 journalists who formed NABJ. I was a television reporter from Minneapolis. It's now known as George Floyd City. Within months of my returning home from that meeting, the son of the president of the Minneapolis NAACP, who was just back from serving in Vietnam, unarmed, was killed by police in a Minneapolis suburb in a dispute about traffic tickets. A month later, I was arrested after I called and complained about the way Minneapolis police had treated one of my neighbors. They went to work searching that computer and found an old parking ticket that I had not paid. Fortunately, it was a weekday, and I went from jail to judge who tossed the ticket to freedom in about 45 minutes. So is Minneapolis a particularly racist city? I never thought so when I lived there, and I don't now. How many majority white cities do you know that have a congresswoman and an attorney general who are not only Black, but Muslim? So if it could happen there, it could happen anywhere, where you live, where I live. And as society's watchdogs, it is our job to watch and to bark. And you know who set the perfect example for us? A Minneapolis teenager named Darnella Frazier, who recorded George Floyd's last moments with her cell phone. Images that may have changed the world. Maybe she should become a journalist someday.
I'm Reg Chapman here at 38th in Chicago and Minneapolis. Since Memorial Day 2020, this has been a place of mourning, a place of healing for anyone seeking a deeper understanding into what happened here. George Floyd spoke his last words and took his last breath here at this site. The past year has been one of many changes for the people of Minneapolis. What you are about to see is what we've endured. It's not pretty. Some may find it hard to watch, but it's our reality, a reality we hope to learn from and create change.
I can breathe.
captured on video a handcuffed George Floyd with the knee of a Minneapolis police officer on his neck.
It's heartbreaking. That young man was no longer a threat.
Being black in America should not be a death sentence.
Mama! A cry that echoed across the world, an image forever etched into the souls of all who watched a life slip away.
The community's upset.
It started a movement. In Minneapolis, it was more of an uprising.
Protesters actually taunted members of the Minnesota State Patrol.
Protests turned violent. A police precinct, homes, businesses burned.
Our commitment is to end our city's toxic relationship with the Minneapolis Police Department.
And in the midst of the storm, city leaders spoke of defunding the police.
There will be thoughtful, intentional work that's done.
That call led to a historic rise in violence across the city.
What is Minneapolis to you?
Home, my life.
Out of chaos came a renewed sense of community.
All of us here want justice.
A call for justice and reform, forging an alliance between neighbors, all moved by a man's cry for his mama.
Language. Language changes over time. Words take on new meaning like breath or viral. Or rather, images we relate to a word can travel like seed over wind. Minneapolis, Houston, Fayetteville, home, raised, born, reform, uprising. Language is best when easily understood. Breath, I can't. Breath, make it make sense. Been happening since. Breath, let the people see what they did to my boy. Viral. Watch, see, silence, fire, fired, charge, charge, street, brick, window, glass. When the looting starts, the shh. Language of the unheard. And what is it America has failed to hear? Justice, peace, growth. A sprout breaking through soil is a violence this country has both cherished and condemned. I know as a mutable fact that Black lives matter. Is now tagged at the entry of a business by its owner. A reporter is pepper sprayed and a march is a skyline of trees, arms intertwined over and through a canopy of lives who, when they saw, viral. Men stood up who had never stood up before. Growth, change, movement, moment, breath. Yes, it happens like this. We are first a fist, size of a mustard grain, hammering away at darkness until finally the sun, then open sky, then a multitude of hands reaching out like branches, together, brown and fighting to live.
Thank you, and thank you for watching. A moment of silence, please, in George Floyd's memory.
Wow, that was such a very powerful video, and just watching the protest, watching Derek Chauvin's knee on George Floyd's neck, similar, I'm sure that it must do something to you every time you watch it, because I know it's painful for me to see every time. And the conversation we're having, it's not only about 1 year after the murder of George Floyd, we're also talking about 30 years after the brutal beating of Rodney King, and 40 years after the McDuffie riots, and 100 years after the Tulsa massacre. So we have an excellent panel that would have a conversation and do a deep dive into some of these very important topics. And I'll be remiss to say, as the chair of the Black Male Media Project here at NABJ-South Florida, if I don't mention a lot of the shootings that's been happening in the South Florida community, specifically in Dade County, it's just been devastating every day turning on the news and seeing people dying at the hands of, their neighbors, family members, whoever, dying. And that's actually why I'm wearing an orange tie in honor of the survivors of gun violence on this National Gun Violence Awareness Day and Wear Orange Weekend. And so as we bring all of these thoughts into confluence, it's my honor to bring to the virtual stage someone who is a mentor to me. I've known him for a very long time. Dr. Marcus Bright. He's with the 5,000 Role Models of Excellence, an organization that I've been a part of since I was in middle school. And I can say that the organization has been very, very beneficial for me. It helped me tremendously as I matriculated through high school and into college and eventually graduated. And so it's my honor to bring to the virtual stage Dr. Marcus Bright. And after Dr. Marcus Bright, you're going to see Dr. Adrian Carter, Dr. Armin Henderson, and Colonel Broads Hartley Jr. So Dr. Marcus Bright, please come to the virtual stage.
Thank you so much, Jefferson, for that gracious introduction. And I want to commend you and the entire NABJ-South Florida chapter for stepping up and engaging in this critical discussion about the images and narratives with Black males in the media. As Jefferson mentioned, my name is Marcus Bright, and I'm a member of NABJ-South Florida. I write primarily for a publication by the name of Diverse Issues in Higher Education, and I've taught public administration and public policy at 5 different universities. I also work now currently with the 5,000 Role Models of Excellence Project, a dropout prevention and mentorship program that has over 10,000 young men. We're under the leadership of Congresswoman Frederica Wilson. And I'm thankful to God to be joined by an extraordinary panel today, Dr. Adrian Carter, Dr. Armin Henderson, Colonel Broads Hartley Jr., and you'll hear more about them as they introduce themselves more broadly and respond to the first question, which is their general reflections on the status and impact of Black men in the media. Let us begin with Colonel Broads Hartley Jr. Colonel Hartley, you can come to the stage at this time. You can also.
Thank you very much.
All right.
I am Broads Hartley, the Chief Executive Officer of Community Health of South Florida, an organization providing equity in health services. I joined this organization in 1984. At that time, we had 2 health centers, the Doris Eisen Health Center on Southwest 216th Street and the Martin Luther King Jr. Clinica Campesina in Homestead. We have grown this organization to now 11 health centers, and we are in 35 schools with school-based services, and we will soon have a 12th health center in Bahama Village in Key West in August of this year. Our organization provides services without regard to race, creed, or color, regardless of income status, and regardless of immigration status. Anyone, whether they have insurance or not, can get services at our health centers. I'm proud to say that this year we are celebrating our 50th anniversary. This organization grew out of a need to serve especially the migrant and Black communities in South Miami-Dade County. People of color could not get services at the local hospital at that time. So it started in 1971. A 4th grade educated woman by the name of Doris Eisen, who was a migrant worker from the Bahamas. And she said, "I'm tired of these Black children dying on the way to Jackson Memorial Hospital." That hospital was about 45 miles away. There were no freeways or turnpikes during that time. And some of those people died on the way to Jackson Memorial Hospital. And that was the impetus to start services at 2 double-wide trailers on Southwest 216th Street and US Highway 1. And so we have grown from the humble beginnings out of 2 double-wide trailers in 1971 to 11 state-of-the-art health centers now, soon to be 12, 35 schools, mobile health unit, mobile dental unit, and we're still growing. I have celebrated my 37th year with CHI as of May 14th of this year. And I'm pleased to be with you on this occasion.
Thank you so much, Colonel Hartley, and feel free to turn your video camera on if it is available to you. I want to shift to Dr. Armin Henderson.
Hi, so thank you for having me, NABJ, and the rest of the crew. I really appreciate, you know, Jefferson. I've known him for a while, and so it's good to be here. And so firstly, it's to introduce myself. I'm a physician at University of Miami Hospital, and also Director of Health Advocacy there. But I also run an organization called the Dade County Street Response, in which we respond to individuals who are victims of gun violence. And also we have a disaster relief team, and also Director of Health Programs with Dream Defenders, which is a social justice organization that is throughout the state of Florida, but particularly located in Miami-Dade County. And so, you know, the way in which Black men are portrayed in the media is it's disheartening. You know, on one hand, you know, when you're seen as a threat to individuals, even though, you know, you're there to help at all, it breaks my heart to know that individuals look at us as threats, etc. But it's not outside of the realm of how America was created and how America wanted us to take our place in society. And so, similar to the way, you know, we disenfranchise and talk about immigrants and others in the country, I think we do it so that if at all genocide does occur, in which I think genocide is occurring amongst Black people in the United States, it's not looked upon unfavorably. And so honestly, since the George Floyd unrest, it was nice to see that people actually do care about the death and destruction of Black people, particularly Black men. But I'm not sure if much has changed since then. So I'm really glad that we're having this conversation. You know, I'm not from South Florida, I'm from Philadelphia, similar neighborhood to the Black neighborhoods in Miami. But you know, I'm happy to be here and happy to contribute in whatever way I can.
Thank you so much, Dr. Henderson. Dr. Adrian Carter.
Good afternoon to you all. Thank you for the opportunity to have me on today. Thank you to the NABJ. Jefferson, thank you as well for the invitation to sit on the panel. Aptly conversation. Unfortunately, this has been an apt conversation that we have to continuously have decade after decade, year after year. The reality is that the Black image of, or the image of Black men has been castrated going back as early as the 1900s, when we talk about it from a media standpoint, all the way back to the Birth of a Nation film by D.W. Griffith. And that's one of those films that really set the stage for how to look at Black men as villains and as criminals, people, Black men who are out to rape and pillage the entire white community, and the KKK is then comes in as the savior. And we've been dealing with that imagery in the media for an extremely long time as we continue to try to have civil rights progression within our society, but always being undermined by what the media projects us as. And unfortunately, what it's done, it has presented us as a monolith. And unfortunately, there is a archetype of what a Black man looks like throughout our media and how it filtrates into our criminal justice system and what our expectations are, even down to our relationships. I'm happy for the day and age that we're in spite of the violence that's going on. We are at least beginning to see some revolutionary change, especially when we endured what we did throughout 2020 during a pandemic and people being at home and having the opportunity to watch firsthand the atrocities that happen to folks like George Floyd and to others throughout the year. So thank you for having me on, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. It's very important for us to have these conversations to impact a positive change in the Black male image.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carter. Colonel Hartley, you gave us such a great history lesson about the beginning and what led to the development of your organization, how Blacks in South Dade did not have access because of the color of their skin to James Archer Smith Hospital in Homestead. They couldn't go to Coral Reef Hospital. They had to go all the way to Jackson Memorial Hospital. What are your recollections of the McDuffie riots and what led to that incident and that whole time? What are your recollections on that, and how does that impact Black males and how they're seen in the media?
That question is a little difficult, and I'm at a disadvantage because at the time of that incident, I was on active duty in the Army at Fort Sam Houston, Texas. We heard very little about the incident in Texas at that time. In fact, I left Texas to go to Germany in 1980, and of course the incident occurred in 1979, and the riots came about in 1980. So there was very little about this in the media at that time. So I became fully aware when I came to Miami in 1984. Prior to that, I really knew very little about the McDuffie incident, the tragedy in Miami. But since being here, and as you know, we've been on the subject many, many times, and we had some commemorations of the event. So I became more aware of that. But the McDuffie incident is one of so many in America. Why it impacted the local community extremely. It is something that we as African Americans in America have to still live with. We go back and I think about the preamble to our Constitution. And that preamble says, "We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish what? Justice, ensure domestic tranquility." There cannot be domestic tranquility, and we know there is not justice today. We are still perfecting this unity in America. And so we have a job to do, both at the local level and the national level, to make this preamble a reality in America. And so we can't let up. Sometimes we think we have arrived because some of us have done pretty well in this society. But we have to be continually concerned about the masses. What are we doing to bring the masses along with us to experience the tranquility, to experience the justice that is spoken to in our preamble? So my position today is the race is not won. The war is not won. we have won battle here and there that we might win, such as the most recent things that happened in Minneapolis. But there are so many opportunities to improve the justice for African Americans in America. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Colonel. Dr. Henderson, you being in healthcare industry, certainly aware of the impact that COVID-19 pandemic has had on the Black community. We also, in this coming up on a year, shortly, a little bit over a year since the George Floyd incident. And then you had your own incident where you were detained by the police in front of your house. And it's just a reminder that you can have a PhD or MD. You're still a Black man in America. What are your reflections on this past year, Floyd, COVID-19, and your own incident?
So even with all the things that America had going on, the world, the pandemic, et cetera, the increased amount of death and destruction, most of it which had taken place amongst poor people and amongst Black people in particular here in the States, America was still business as usual. Police were still out there, hassling people over masks and the disparate contact and the disparate responses to individuals who basically were just trying to survive the pandemic, just showed that even at a time where there's unrest, that Black people, poor people are still really just under all out attack. And so I guess my reflections over the last year were that whether it be hell or high water or disaster or pandemic, Black people, particularly Black people who are working class and poor, really need to be organized around specific issues, really need to be organized around responding to incidents and events in their own community, and cannot become complacent with the way things are, which I'm sure individuals are not. But as the Colonel said, the fight is never over. The war has not been won. And so, just staying within the confines of that, it's been really rough. And then, to add to that, the fact that individuals were losing their jobs, individuals were losing their houses, unemployment checks were not coming on time. And all of these things, no matter where you are in the world, lead to increase of violence. And that's exactly what we've seen as of recent. Over the weekend, we had multiple shootings, et cetera, people dying on their way to the hospital. I mean, I was on call and working in the hospital, and they were, people with gunshot wounds were coming to the wrong hospital. I've been doing these workshops where individuals are learning how to bandage gunshot wounds using the things around them, the same things that the Colonel learns and other individuals in the military learn when they're at war. And we're just unprepared to deal with the ramifications of decreased economic opportunities that are as a result of that. You're seeing hundreds of years long effects play out in present day. And not only that, but the fact that the response from the government has been to put more police, more individuals that cause increased trauma in our neighborhoods, to put our pain and suffering on a national stage, and to make it seem like we're animals or something of that nature, and therefore deserving to be thrown in cages. It's just disheartening, honestly. And I really think that the media has to do a better job. And I just want to say this lastly. One of the images that has spread across the world has gone viral, quote unquote, over the last couple of days was the image of a father crying who lost his son due to gun violence a couple of days ago, and him not even being allowed to speak and say his word, you know? And it's just been a lot to deal with. And I think everything is coming to a head, and I don't think we have a plan for how to move forward. I have a plan, and I think others in the community have a plan on how to move forward, but I'm not sure if our elected officials do.
Thank you, Doc. If you feel comfortable, would you mind sharing about your incident?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I was, you know, well, first of all, over the course of the pandemic, we were running a hygiene site in which we were serving unsheltered individuals throughout Overtown and downtown Miami. The majority of them who happen to be middle-aged Black men, which, if you think about in itself, Black men and Black people across the country make up a large percentage of homeless populations across the country. And so we were set up like a 12-hour shower site where individuals could take a shower, could wash their hands, could get access to hygiene products, et cetera, and just seek refuge from the onslaught that they were taking, not only from people who just couldn't fathom why an individual would have to, use the restroom on the side of the street, but also police who were arresting individuals for being next to businesses, et cetera, sleeping outside, et cetera. And so we just wanted a place where homeless people could feel safe, basically. And so in the midst of that, we were calling out the county and the city about the way that they were doing their job and handling the majority of the homeless people who, again, happened to be middle-aged Black men. And I had a press conference that was set up that same day in which we were going to deliver tents and other things to individuals. And an officer pulled in front of my house and basically, asked me what I was doing, and moments later put me in handcuffs. And so my wife was the one that brought it to everyone's attention, and it went viral and across the world, et cetera. And people were upset that a physician, could get arrested, especially a physician that's doing really good things in the community. I mean, I wasn't too surprised about it because it's happened to me before. But after that, what we found was that police officers can arrest individuals in Florida for no apparent reason. According to the stop and frisk law, they can violate our Fourth Amendment rights. And not only that, but the officer that pulled me over and detained me for the short period of time that he did was harassing other individuals as well. He had 6 use of force complaints. He had 7, civilian complaints. And this individual was never reprimanded, but he was promoted. And so, it's just been a whirlwind of things that happened since then. But those are basically events that surrounded when I got detained.
Thank you, Dr. Henderson. And that's a great example of how we're all connected. When I walk outside, the way I'm treated is largely based on media-generated stereotypes that are connected to other Black men across the country. So thank you so much for sharing that. Dr. Carter, Dr. Colonel Hartley reflected on the McDuffie riots. I wasn't alive during that time. My first real recollection in terms of the media was, as Jefferson mentioned, the Rodney King beating as a young child. I suspect you were probably young around that age too. What impact did seeing that have on you and your perspective of policing between law enforcement and Black males?
A lot, and even just hearing Dr. Henderson's story, one of the things that's upsetting to me is that we're not allowed to be upset. That's one of the most riveting things to me, when the whole perception of being an angry Black man and how that anger is automatically becomes suspicious. It means that criminal behavior or violence is on the verge. And that's what the image of Black men in our media has, that's one of the things that's ultimately done. I was around 10 years old when the Rodney King situation happened. I fully remember seeing it on TV. I remember the trial. And I remember what seemed to be a very obvious situation. And I can remember all of this, you know, at that age, 10 going on 11 years old, remembering what transpired and remembering the police officers not being found guilty and the riots that took place after that. It automatically lets you know as a child, young Black male, even if it's not to the forefront of your consciousness, subconsciously you file it. And you understand that your Blackness, the criminal justice system, law enforcement automatically has a particular bias towards you. When I do a lot of work in the community with men and with doing workshops in conflict resolution. I'm a conflict resolution practitioner. I also founded the Empowerment Conference, which is a conference for men. It's been 3 years running now. 2022 will be our 4th annual conference, and it focuses on leadership development and conflict resolution practices for men. And as I've gone through, because I also teach and I train on courageous conversations about race, and I do facilitative dialogues and work in the sphere of teaching others how to resolve conflict, I've had to go through my own implicit bias test. I've had to work on understanding how I feel about race so that I could help others in my practice with how they feel about race. And one of the things that I realized that I learned about myself is that I adapted some white acting behavior, and I'm going to call it that, right? In terms of the way that I present myself, the way I conduct myself, in order to create a separation between what that Black narrative of a Black man looks like, right? So that that was in my subconscious. And I went through the process of learning about myself and race and realized that I do that as a survival mechanism. In other words, I don't feel comfortable and free to just be myself as a Black person. I have to make sure that I look and I show up a particular way. Because when the police officer comes around, and ironically, you watch the news. I love I love it when I say love, I mean it sarcastically, right? There's really a disdain to it. I love and I find it ironic when we see the videos of white people resisting arrest. And they drive the car with the police officer hanging off the side of the car about how they're not going to be arrested. They pull guns and drive off in the police car as a way to get away to resist an arrest. And those guys never get shot. They seem to. There definitely seems to be a care for white people in the preservation of their life. I know that when police officers show up, the last thing I want to look like is the angry Black man, right? I played football. I got this football built on me thanks to the genes from my dad, and I can't look like the angry Black man. And even for and that's just my personal story. So that Rodney King situation, how and when you really look at it, it's generational, right? Every one of us, every decade, there is a major crisis of how the Black image, police law enforcement interaction, that is a major case, and it's a major disruption in our society. And it seems to get worse every year and more egregious. You know, as we can move from the McDuffie riots to O.J. Simpson, Trayvon Martin, to what's happened with George Floyd. And that's just naming popular names, right? Names, when we say their names, it's over 200 people, it's nearly 200 people on that list of unarmed folks that we are able to track, you know, depending on how we want to categorize it. So it's been very impactful. And back in the 90s, when this happened, you know, a few years later, Rodney King happened in 1991, O.J. Simpson case happened in 1995. And I know we don't talk about O.J. Simpson, but I think O.J. Simpson's case bought into the narrative of the violent Black man who, even though he got off, he still, he was this Black person, this all-American who was in the public eye in the judicial system going through a trial for murder. He was almost the epitome. He looked like the epitome of the image that they wanted to portray, which is why when you fast forward after his trial and looked at the civil suits, and they've come for OJ in any way they can in order to make up for him being released, right? For him not being found guilty the first time. So this is an ongoing narrative. Lastly, I just want to say what Dr. Henderson talked about. What are you doing about it, right? Each person, I fundamentally agree. Everyone should have an initiative, should have a goal, should be stationed at a post that they are doing something to forward our community. I think that is very important. I do that through the Empowerment Conference. I do that as a conflict resolution practitioner and a leadership development trainer, and making moves in that space in order to help train people with financial literacy and other things. We should all be doing something. Thank you. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you so much for those very enlightening comments. And you hinted at something that we think about, but we seldom discuss, that there's a lot of pressure to comport yourself to be a docile, non-threatening, no backbone having Negro in order to advance yourself career-wise. And that's one of the things I appreciate about the 5,000 role models and Congresswoman Wilson. She has an unapologetic focus on boys of color. And I just believe that, hey, if you stand up, God will hold you up. Lastly, as we close out, I just want to get you all's reflections on the recent uptick, the surge in shootings in our community. And it's like you have to be afraid of the cops and the robbers. What role does the media play in it? And what do you think is causing this recent uptick in devastating killings in our community? Let me start with Dr. Henderson, then Colonel Hartley, and then Dr. Carter.
I do think that this is a good medium to talk about what role the media is playing in portraying individuals that are doing the shootings, et cetera. And there's a young lady's name, I forget her name. She has a short haircut. She used to work for, she's Haitian, of Haitian descent from South Florida. NABJ Green. She basically was talking about how the media was talking about the incident that had happened, whether or not they were Miami Gardens adjacent or West Miami Gardens. They were hesitant to say that it was in Hialeah, which is where shootings don't normally occur. It was just outside of the bounds of where normally gun violence occurs. And because of that, they were scrambling, trying to figure out what exactly to call it. In the media, they were saying that it was a mass shooting or something of that nature, in which, you know, the story and the pictures just didn't fit. And NABJ really drew a lot of irony out of the way that they were reporting that in the media in a Facebook post she made. So I'm parroting what she says. If you want to know, just go to her Facebook, and she wrote like a long blurb about it. But I think that you should, you know, examine that. But from my perspective, I look at shootings, urban gun violence in a different light than other individuals, because I am a health professional. First of all, I like to parse out and say that there are different types of gun violence. There's urban gun violence or gang violence, whatever you want to call it. There's intimate partner violence or domestic violence that involves guns. There's mass casualty, in which we've seen an uptick in, you know, the same amount of shootings that occur in our neighborhoods are occurring across the United States, but in mass shootings occurred by white men, and yet you really don't hear much about it. And I think that's something to examine as well. And then there's one other type of, there's police involved gun violence as well. For gun violence that involves individuals in our neighborhoods, and I think I mentioned this, it's particularly related to the decreased public investment, governmental investment, and funds that individuals receive in our neighborhoods. And if you look at violence and economics, anytime you have a decrease of economic stability in any place across the country, white, black, brown, Asian, et cetera, you're going to see an uptick in violence. And so I think that we are seeing exactly that, exacerbated by the fact that we've all been in the house. You know, people have economic anxieties and et cetera that have been perpetuated and made worse by COVID-19, being cooped up in the house, et cetera, along with the fact that, you know, climate also has an effect on violence across the world as well. And there are a lot of studies about that. So I look at violence from a public health standpoint, and particularly in Miami-Dade County and the urban neighborhoods that we're seeing the result of decreased investment in our community. And we don't have the right tools that are able to, we can't just increase the amount of police and think that violence is going to go down in our community. And so when I say that to say that we went to a place where violence was the number one, gun violence was number one in the United States, in Newark, New Jersey, and individuals there have a community response in which they hire people from the neighborhood, returning felons, those that have good relationships with people in the neighborhood, to intercede in violence and to mitigate it at its root. And they've seen a 51% decrease in homicides, even amidst all the increase of homicides that you see across Miami-Dade County and other similar counties across the United States. So it is a public health problem. We should treat it more like a public health problem and more like a virus, honestly, than anything else. But that's not what we're doing. So yeah, that's my answer.
Thank you, Dr. Henderson. Colonel Hartley.
Yes, I'd like to echo what the doctor has just mentioned. We have gone through a great deal with this pandemic, and people have been shut up, they've lost jobs, income has gone, and the anxiety they experience, the mental health is what we're really dealing with now. And that brings about a lot, because when we talk about health in general, we're talking about physical, mental, social, and spiritual well-being for the individual as well as for the community. And at this time in our existence, our communities are not well. They're not in a state of health. We've got to work with our communities. And that's why I'm so pleased that my organization is called Community Health of South Florida. Not only do we take care of people at our facilities, we have outreach workers in the community working with those communities. And I just directed my staff to hire some more outreach workers, because I want these workers to be dedicated to a specific community. For example, West Perrine, Homestead, Goulds, Naranja, and to be in those communities every day as a community health workers. Get to know the people and the people get to know them, so they can address the concerns of the people in the community, and they can direct them to the help that they need, whether that is a behavioral health, a physical medicine, or whatever social problems they may be experiencing. You know, we find people trying to cut back on unemployment because the federal government is giving people a little money now. So our state want to cut back. This is all ridiculous. These people are suffering. They are in crisis, and we need to help them. And we need to be in the communities every day to help these people heal themselves and their community.
Thank you so much, Colonel Hartley, and thank you for all of your service and efforts to expand access to healthcare for our community. Dr. Carter.
Well, you know, white supremacy is alive and thriving well. You know, make no bones about it. While we may be looking at our community specifically, you know, so many cities, neighborhoods across the United States are faced with deprivation, lack of resources, Our Black people suffer across the entire country on a daily basis. It's not even just systemic to the United States of America. We understand that our motherland of Africa is raped and its resources are extracted in so many of the countries over there. So when we talk about looking at the crime that's been happening here recently, I mean, people are deprived. They don't have what they need. They have not had it for a long time. And anytime that people are desperate enough, desperate times call for desperate measures. We live in a society, and let's be clear about this down here in South Florida, where we do have a very drastic race issue between Black, whites, and Hispanic, right? So let's call a spade a spade. And it's not even just Black and white, as we also have white Hispanics who operate not as a minority group, but they operate as a majority group under the same guidelines of white supremacy. So the difference between a white Hispanic and a white American for Blacks in South Florida is absolutely no difference. They're the same entity. They operate under the guise of white supremacy, which is why even when I speak to law enforcement officers, even in working in the station, they understand that there's a drastic difference between what they're capable of doing, even for their upward mobility, and how they police in order to maintain their job security, versus how non-Blacks, Hispanics, and other white people are allowed to operate. And then even for those in the Hispanic community, they have their own racial issue, because if you're a dark Hispanic, you got to deal with the consequences of still being a Black Hispanic, which is why we have the political delineation throughout the city, whether you're from the Dominican Republic or you're from Cuba or you're from Venezuela or from Costa Rica, right? All of those things filter into South Florida. So Black people are dealing with this segregation and this supremacy of whiteness throughout South Florida in very, very deep ways. And even saying it almost sounds scary to somebody. You even hear me say it. Oh, I can't even believe you saying that. I'm gonna call it what it is. I'm already Black. You can't take that off of me. Because what happens there is it allows the Hispanic community, which is what goes back to what Dr. Henderson was saying. I heard the same news. They did not want to say that the shooting happened in Hialeah. They didn't want to say it. Yeah, so think about it. Adjacent within South Florida. See that? So it's not even about, it is about color. And unfortunately in South Florida, we have the added caveat of it also being about language. And we have the added caveat of it being about culture. See, as long as your skin is light enough, as a white Hispanic, you can still mitigate, you can still join some level of allegiance or alliance across your language and across your nationality based on you being Latin or Hispanic. So that's the type of siege that our Black people are under in South Florida. But even for our Hispanic brothers and sisters, those who act like brothers and sisters, let's be clear about that, they too are not too far behind us because they're under siege economically as well, right? It's not designed for them to win. It's not designed for us to win either. So from a solution-oriented standpoint, each of us got to pick up a mantle and do something. Do something. If you're not doing something, it's weird. Those are my thoughts. It's going to continue to be what it is until, but at the same time, I'm happy to say that overall, I think our community is doing more positive things and we are making some progress in spite of what's going on. Thank you.
The doors of the church are open. The Reverend Dr. Adrian Carter has given a benediction for this panel. Thank you, panelists. Thank you so much to the NABJ South Florida chapter for utilizing this incredible vehicle. You know, we have the power of our own definition. We can flip the script. We can rearrange and change the narrative to accelerate the needed progress and momentum for transformative change that our community so desperately needs. So thank you again to our panelists, Dr. Armin Henderson, the Reverend Dr. Adrian Carter, and Colonel Hartley. I'll give it back to our brother, Jefferson Noel. Thank you so much.
What an incredible, incredible panel. Thank you so much, Dr. Marcus Bright, for moderating this panel. You did a phenomenal job. We deeply appreciate it. You continuously make me proud to be a member and a mentor in the 5,000 Role Models program. And so seeing how you moderate this panel, it gives me more hope for the future, especially with the young men that you work with on a daily basis. And I encourage everyone on who's listening on Facebook, here on Zoom, and even the panelists as well, to read the article that Dr. Marcus Bright wrote. If you could share with us the name of the website again, we would appreciate that.
Yeah, diverse issues in higher education.
Diverse issues in higher education. And I'm going to get the link and put it on the Facebook and also on the Zoom chat as well for you all to read it. That was a great article. And to our panelists, Colonel Hartley, I appreciate you. Dr. Henderson, Dr. Carter, thank you so much for accepting our invitation. And this definitely will not be the last time we have this conversation. And so as we move on with the program, I definitely want to do a quick reflection on the panel. I have someone I'm going to bring on stage before we bring on the next panel. But I must say the next panel is going to blow your socks off. And I'm going to encourage you right now to take a few moments to just share this video. So if you're watching on Facebook, I encourage you to go on right now and share this video with your friends, with your family, with your loved ones, because we have an amazing panel coming up next. So I'm going to set a 1-minute timer, and I encourage you folks on Facebook to share the video on Facebook. Excellent, excellent. Thank you. Thank you all so much for sharing the video. I saw we jumped up a few shares, so I appreciate that. And we have more folks watching us on Facebook. So just for a couple minutes, I would like to bring to the virtual stage someone who is known as a modern day Renaissance man, award-winning filmmaker, and a professor at Miami-Dade College. And he's also a committee member on this great committee for the Black Male Media Project, Mr. Yanata. Hey, Yanata, how are you?
Good day, good day. Thank you, Jefferson, for the opportunity to speak and the opportunity to be here at the Inspire Black Men Media Project. And a quick reflection on what we talked about. With Dr., again, shout outs to Marcus, Dr. Bright, Colonel Hartley, Dr. Carter, so many more for what we've done and what you've talked about. So a quick reflection of what we just spoke about, that yes, we are now 100 years away. One thing we didn't get a chance to speak about is we were 100 years. This week was the commemorating of the burning down of Black Wall Street, right? And we talked about how the challenges. I love when when Dr. Henderson talked about the different types of violence and how we should treat violence like a virus, right? We are having a virus of 100+ years, of centuries of a virus of violence that we can address, and we are addressing. And as Dr. Bright said, this is an opportunity to flip the script. We've talked about some of the challenges we faced in dealing with in the communities as we go out there and taking on the challenges. One of the things that Dr. Henderson talked about is the image of the Black father crying in our community where the shooting happened in Hialeah. We can't be shown as the angry Black man, but we also can't be shown as the crying Black man, right? Because there's a lot of challenges that we're facing, from economic, social, and so much more. And one of the things we talked about is how we have to have economic investment to empower our community. Because once we increase into the investments, the decrease in violence, there's a correlation to that. When we increase in the education in our society, because as a professional entrepreneurship, I talk about the importance of investing in ourselves, educating ourselves, learning the economic equity. With more economic equity, there'll be a chance of less violence. And so I'm grateful for this panel. I'm grateful for what's going to happen. And I'm grateful for the next panel that conversation is going to knock our socks off, and the role that our elected officials have. What are the next actionable steps our elected officials going to take? And I look forward to hearing, and we look forward to hearing about what those steps are and how we can take the different, we talked about everyone picking up a mantle, but there's a phrase in Haitian Creole that says, l'union fait la force, right? There's strength in unity. Yes, we each have our mantle, but how can we bring those mantles together to overall make a progress and change? I look forward to those things from 100 years ago of destroying of Black Wall Street, but how are we going to rebuild it? And not just the Black Wall Street, but when we succeed and when we have success, everyone succeeds, from our motherland in Africa to overall in America and around the world. So Professor Noel, thank you for the time. And I'm glad and I'm fortunate to be a part of this panel.
Of course. Thank you, Professor. And honestly, that was a very, very good summary of everything that we learned. And please stick with us, because I know this panel is going to be amazing. And we look forward to the reflection as well. And so it is my honor and pleasure to bring to the virtual stage so many amazing men and a woman, Major Keandra Simmons, who's with us as well. So I would love for Commissioner Keon Hardiman to turn on your camera, Mayor Rodney Harris, Major Keandra Simmons, and Judge Orlando Prescott. Please feel free to turn on your cameras right now. Awesome. Look at these beautiful people. Thank you so much for joining us at the 5th annual Black Male Media Project with NABJ-South Florida. I have all of your bios, and all of you are so accomplished. If I were to sit down and read your bios, it will be Monday morning by the time I am done. And so I'm going to ask each and every one of you to just please share who you are with the beautiful people, share what you do, and then also share something you are passionate about before we jump right into the conversation. So on my Zoom, I see Judge Orlando Prescott is closest to me. So I'll go to him first.
Assalamu alaikum. Peace to everyone. Thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Orlando Prescott. My title is the Administrative Judge of the Juvenile Division. I like to believe that we're responsible for from birth to age 19. As I said, I sit in the Juvenile Division where we're responsible for juvenile delinquency cases and dependency cases. Came down here in 1984 and made this my home.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Judge. I'm going to go to Major Keandra Simmons.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you, NABJ, for having me. My name is Keandra Simmons. I'm just the newly elected treasurer of the Miami-Dade County Association of Chief of Police. It's an honor to be a part of such a distinguished panel of Black men whom I've had the pleasure and opportunity of working alongside in some aspect of community partnership. Community partnership is my passion, and just kind of being that voice within the police agency of the African Americans, and plus just being a kind of role model for our community and as well as our officers to do right by people of color. Thank you.
Perfect, perfect. And I'm jumping to Commissioner Hardiman.
Hello, everyone. I am Keon Hardiman, graduate of Florida A&M University with my bachelor's and master's in business administration, also University of Miami for law school. I served as a assistant public defender. I actually appeared before Judge Prescott. I served, of course, with Mayor Harris and worked along with Major Simmons. And so I served as the City of Miami Commissioner for 7 years, 4 years as the chairman there, and now I am a commissioner for Miami-Dade County.
Good, thank you, thank you. Mayor Harris. It appears as though his video is frozen. I'm going to give it a few seconds as his video comes back on. I'm going to jump into one of the first questions, and once Mayor Harris' video comes back on, I'll ask him to share more about himself. But the first question is for Judge Prescott. As you know, we're having a conversation about Black men and our relationship with law enforcement. And so part of our goal this entire event was to acknowledge our past, understand our present, and work toward a better future. And so Judge Prescott, what was your experience with NYPD as a young Black man in New York that will always stick with you? And how did that shape your worldview as it relates to law enforcement?
As stated, I grew up in New York. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, Crown Heights. And the precinct that was responsible for policing the community that I lived in was the 77th precinct. You'll ask yourself, after all these years, how do you remember? I remember because the treatment that we got, it was disparate treatment. In Crown Heights, we also had a large Hasidic Jewish population. And it was a great difference between how the police in the 77th precinct treated the Hasidic Jews to how they treated people of color. I watched the block I grew up on had a bar, and there was always a dice game. I grew up watching a dice game, and I mentioned that because there was never any fights, no bloodshed, no shooting, no anything, but routinely they would come by, they being the police, they would arrest the brothers shooting dice, they would beat the brothers shooting dice. If you ran, you were guaranteed to get a beat down. And then some of the times they would be detained, the money taken, but arrests were never made. So that's what I grew up seeing. And then when I got to high school, I was bused to a predominantly white neighborhood where we would have race fights. This was back in the 70s. And I never understood how, where everybody knew what was going to happen. And we had a city block to walk from the school to the elevated train. And we always knew when the fights were going to happen. We were going to leave school and we were going to be encountered by a large group of white guys. But there was never any police there to stop it. The police showed up later on, and then we would be harassed. Some of us will be arrested because as a consequence of knowing that you're going to be jumped, yes, they would bring bats, they would bring billy clubs, they'll bring brass knuckles. So we were arrested for defending ourselves, but we were never protected in that experience. So that's what I saw. I saw the disparate treatment, the unequal, the unfair treatment from a very young age, all the way through.
Wow. And I could imagine growing up and seeing that on a daily basis, experiencing that, it must have really hurt your view on law enforcement. And so I think that's a really powerful story. I want to go back to Mayor Harris. If you could kindly introduce yourself and share some about who you are and what you are passionate about. We would appreciate that.
Sure, Noel. I appreciate the opportunity to be here this afternoon. I am Rodney Harris. I'm the mayor of the city of Miami Gardens, newly elected. Also one of the vice presidents for the Miami-Dade County League of Cities, Florida League of Cities Board, executive board member. And the one thing that I'm passionate about is the children of our community. I think as Prescott and Commissioner Hardiman could attest to the fact that we're all in this boat together, for passionate about what we want to do for our kids in this community. So it is truly an honor to be a part of this panel and to be amongst these great men and women that's sitting on this panel. So I'm here to answer whatever questions you have, and hopefully our insight can bring solutions to whatever issues with that we're having in our communities.
Thank you, Mayor. I deeply appreciate it. And so I'm going to jump to Commissioner Hardiman. Commissioner, you heard Judge Prescott's experience growing up in New York, in Brooklyn, New York, to be specific. And Commissioner, I know that you were raised in Liberty City. So how do you feel police and community relations change since your youth?
I had an interesting experience growing up dealing with police, because I come from a very large family. My grandmother gave birth to 15 children. And so we had 2 homes in James G. Scott public housing projects. And obviously in the public housing projects, there weren't many families that had a lot of financial success. And so we found ourselves in places where people were routinely harassed by police officers. Along the way, my mother actually became a police officer. She worked for the City of Miami Police Department, and she retired from there after about 20 years of service. That was enough time for her, Major Simmons, and I think you understand. But I remember vividly when I was going to a middle school in Broward County for a year, and I missed the school bus. And so I had to walk to University and Pines Boulevard. And anybody who's listening to this knows that there's an IHOP right there on that corner. And so I remember an undercover car, as I'm sitting on the bus stop, passing me by, and I just knew that that officer was going to harass me. The officer did pull into the parking lot. What was strange about this occurrence was that another person got out of the vehicle with her, and he had a camera. And so he was taking lots of pictures of me. And so the officer took me, Judge Prescott, began to search my person. Obviously, I hadn't committed any crime. Sitting on the bus stop, the bus would take me on a direct shot to the middle school that I was attending. And I remember saying to the officer commanded me to her presence, checked my person, went through my book bag, and started to ask me what was I doing. I said, well, I'm waiting on the bus to go to school. I missed the bus. And I tried to relate to the officer by saying, I see you all the time. And she replied to me, yeah, I know you're a troublemaker. And then I realized she didn't know who I was by any means, because at that time in my life, one, I had never skipped a day of school in my life. At that time, I didn't probably skip school until my senior year of high school. But I was a good kid. I had great grades. You know, I was athletic, so I had a lot of things going for myself. And when the bus came, I asked her. I said, "Well, there's the bus. Can I get on it?" And she told me no. She was going to take me to Jack. So I didn't quite understand, because I had never at the time in my life heard of Jack, because I had never been suspended or, you know, I don't even think at that time I had any detentions in my life. So I was a good kid in that sense. And so eventually, after the bus came, the bus went, and she put me in the back of a police car. Unknowingly to me, there was one of my family members on my brother's side was in the restaurant. They came out, they saw me in the back of the police car. So they began to inquire with the officer about how and why I was located in the back of the police car. And they're trying to explain to the officer that, hey, whatever, this kid is not a bad kid. If he's trying to go to school, that's what he's telling me. They still dismissed my family members. Eventually, as the officer got back into the car, I said to the officer, you know, my mother is a city of Miami police officer under Chief Donald Warson. She paused, she looked back at me and she said, why didn't you tell me that earlier? And I said, well, I told you I wanted to go to school. And she said, well, what do you want to do? I said, I want to go to school.
Yes.
He called another officer. That officer transported me to the school. Now, I thought that that was the end of the worst day that I had at that time in my life interacting with police officers in Broward County. But it was not, because the very next day, on the front page of the Sun Sentinel in color, anyone who knows me, I have a big head. So from the back, you knew who I was. I had on a Marlins jersey that was teal and some teal sweatpants. So it was very recognizable. They had me on the front page of the Sun Sentinel, and the title of the article, the description of it says that officers take truant back to school, which was a bold-faced lie. And I remember inside the paper, there was a black and white shot of a white kid that had been stopped who had stolen radios, but he was on the inside of the article, and I was on the front page. And so that was one of the first interactions that I had with police officers. Although my mother was an officer, that really painted my picture about law enforcement and being a black man in South Florida, just trying to do the right thing.
Wow. And I think that story is apropos for this conversation, because not only did you have a bad experience with law enforcement, but also with the media as well. And as you know, this is the Black Male Media Project, and we're speaking about how Black men are viewed in the media. And so I think that's sort of an indictment on the negative stories that were portrayed for Black males, especially young men like you who were just trying to do the right thing. And so do you feel like things have changed since then?
No, I don't think things have changed much. And when I talk about how you kind of moved over to media, I still have negative experiences with media as a black man. And I jokingly say this with some of my close friends. I said, man, if I were a white man or a white Hispanic in South Florida, I would be praised in the media for the work that I've done within my community. When you talk about $400 million for affordable housing and sea level rise, an anti-poverty initiative, we just passed $19 million to combat gun violence and ensure prosperity in Miami-Dade County. I mean, these accomplishments that commissioners who sat there for 20 years have not been able to accomplish. And I've only served in public service for 8 years, in less than 4 months in the county, and we were able to get these things accomplished. And so what you see, moreover, in the media is always trying to paint the picture or create the doubt that as a person in service, that I'm not honest, I'm not forthright, I'm not any of these things. And, it hurts me more in particular, and I think Judge Prescott would understand this, because I'm young, not only in my career in politics, but also in law. And so, when I appear before a judge, that judge has all the confidence in me to give him the truth. I have a duty and responsibility to have candor to the court, and I would never jeopardize that sort of candor, not only in front of the judge, but in public, because I am held responsible for the things that I say from my mouth. And so I take that very seriously. But, as black men in South Florida, especially in politics, we don't have the opportunity to even complain about it, right? We can't do anything about it. All we can do is try to tell our story. And so we depend on people who look like us, who've gone through the experiences that we've experienced, to tell us, to tell our side of the story, to give a balanced approach to things. Not all elected officials who are of our color do everything correctly, but at least give those who are doing the right thing an opportunity to say, hey, you've done a good job, and the people who you represent should be proud of you.
Yeah, and thank you, Commissioner, for sharing that. I know we have a lot of members of the media who's watching this conversation, and so I think that's very important that you share that experience. I'm going to go to Major Simmons. I know in the experience Commissioner Hardiman shared, there wasn't too much conversations about the shootings of unarmed black men, and thank God that he didn't have that experience. as far as I saw personally, as far as you mentioned. But there is a lot of conversations around police shootings, especially as it relates to unarmed Black men, not only in our community, but around the country as well. And so my question is, every time there's a police-involved shooting of an unarmed Black man or some level of police-imposed escalation, the first question people ask is about the de-escalation training officers receive. Major Simmons, do you feel the de-escalation training is enough to deal with the problems you see on a daily basis?
So personally, I can only address the de-escalation training on a local level, which is within Miami-Dade County. I trained at Miami-Dade College over 17 years ago. And during that time, all agencies were training together and we were all taught the same levels of de-escalation, no matter what patch you were wearing. In Miami-Dade County, I do think that we are different from other areas because we are given the tools and resources to address de-escalation daily. And I think the difference between Miami-Dade County is that we're a melting pot. So a lot of time our officers are exposed daily to all ethnicities throughout the county, entire county. And if you look at some of the other shootings in some of the rural areas where they were taking place at, they weren't used to interacting with people that look like us. So, Commissioner Hardin can attest, Judge Prescott can attest, like daily, it's nothing for us to run into kids from the square, kids from the Overtown, and just pretty much building a rapport with them and knowing who they are, where they are, and just kind of interacting with them on a daily basis. And currently with Miami-Dade Chief Organization, we're trying to ensure that all law enforcement agencies are adhering to the same levels of de-escalation training as well. So we're different from other areas just because of so many different ethnicities that we interact. Now, not to say that at some point in time, God forbid, we may have one, but if you look over the history, I think we're doing fairly well as far as de-escalation compared to some other areas. But of course, there's always room for improvement within law enforcement as far as de-escalation.
Yeah, agreed. And I'm sure almost everyone on this panel would agree that by and large, the police officers who go out every single day, they do a good job and they have a good heart and they're genuine. But as you all know, there are bad apples in the police department. So how do you feel the police department can do a better job in weeding out the bad apples?
The only way we're going to continue to weed out bad apples is with community's help. A lot of people may not understand. Contact internal affairs, always requesting supervisor, and just making us aware of any negative encounters that you're having with our officers. A lot of people may not be aware that you are allowed to, film scenes as long as you're not putting any sort of harm's way and as long as you're not jeopardizing the scene. And I always look at law enforcement just like having kids. When your kid's around, they were going to be on the best behavior. They won't act out of line or they won't do anything wrong or mischievous in front of you. But like with any other profession, when you're not around, they tend to act in a certain way. And I'm a stickler when I was actually inside of the district to ensure that if you had any officers that worked directly under me, that you were treated unfairly or had any sort of disparity treatment, you have my number to contact me directly and I will address it. But unless the community or unless the citizens or business owners make us aware of what's going on with these officers, that's the only way we're going to get the ball rolling to kind of start weeding out those that don't belong in the profession.
Good. I think that's really good advice, and I hope everyone who's listening really take heed to that. Mayor Harris, you are one of the founders of the Department of Juvenile Justice's Success Through Empowerment program, which is also known as STEP. This mentoring program targets both at-risk youth and youth who had contact with the criminal justice system. So from your experience as a mentor with kids in the system, what do you feel is missing, if anything, in making the justice system more just?
Well, I think that in certain situations that we have to look at the disproportionate minority contact that's taking place in our community. And there's different social changes, like, we look at the economic conditions and the healthcare, for example, and even the impact delinquency has on the juvenile justice system. So a lot of those things, there's we have to look at a better, we got to continue to have fair police practices and ensure prosecutorial integrity, as well as the equitable sentencing and ensure decent detention conditions for our kids. So there's a lot of things that has to take place to make the system a little bit better. And Judge Prescott could probably answer that question better than I. But there's so many things. We got to look at where these kids come from, how they were raised. And we take a lot of those things under consideration and look at the overall kid, not just the fact that this kid may be part of some criminal background or whatever. We look at his overall conditions. We look at everything. We try to take all those things under considerations before making recommendations to our courts and things in reference to our children. So we have to look at the whole big picture. You know, you go back to, I was listening to Commissioner Hardiman, and he was talking about where he grew up. Well, me and his family, we've been friends for a long time. His mother and I went to high school together, along with some of his other relatives. And we understand the concept of that village and how the village is going to help us. And we have to get our kids more involved with, we got to bridge the gap between our young kids and our older generation. They have to see some things. We have to deal with parent issues we got to deal with. There's so many things that we have to deal with. So there's a lot of issues that's going to have to be addressed, and we got to have these conversations, and the conversations have to be truthful conversations.
Mm-hmm. Good. Yes, I agree, Mayor. And I'm going to ask you about what we can do on a local level in a few, but I actually want to jump down to Judge Prescott, because you did mention how he will have a unique perspective on the justice system. So Judge Prescott, from the perspective of someone from the judicial branch, what is the court's responsibility in ensuring the scales of justice are balanced and fair for all?
When you speak of the scales of justice, I believe the judiciary is supposed to be the fulcrum. We are the ones who stand in the middle to make sure that when it starts, they're both at equally balanced. Okay, no one side has an unfair advantage. No one side has an unfair access to the court that is freely done. And if there is some improper imbalance, that's when we're supposed to step forward and equal it out. There's a dirty word that judges are called when they seek to equal it out. They're called activist judges. And that is a dirty word. Okay. But I believe that that is the only way that it can be done properly. We're there to ensure that anyone who walks into the courtroom, they get a fair hearing. One of the things that I'm keenly aware of is my duality in this process. My duality as a man of color and a member of this system of justice that to many people is a system of injustice. It's a great sense of pride that I have when people of color, when they walk into my courtroom and they see me there, they have a slight smile, not because they're going to get off, but because they believe, they have a perception that is going to be fair, that whatever happens, they know that they got a fair shake. And that's what the system is supposed to be about, because the reality is not just fairness in the act, but the perception of fairness is just as equally important. People have to believe that the system is fair. So we, as the judiciary, we have to be that fulcrum to make sure that it's even. I heard Dr. Carter say before, you had to man a position. Well, this is my position on the judiciary. Just like in the movie A Few Good Men, you know, you need me on that wall. Last year, with the death last year, I used to be an assistant state attorney here in Miami-Dade County. I also was an assistant United States attorney for the Southern District of Florida here in Dade County. So I understand that duality. So after the death of George Floyd, I called the Black prosecutors together because I needed to have a conversation with them. And we cried and we talked about how hurtful it was. But I impressed upon them that I needed them to be exactly where they were. Out of anger, out of hurt, they could not abdicate that position because we needed them there. Just like I believe that people of color needs to be where we are, Major Simmons needs to be where she is, and I need to be where I am, because if it's done right, things have to change. I was taught that a long time ago, that if you're true to yourself and you come to the table, things have to change, because they can't conduct business the same way they used to if you're true to yourself. So I believe that we on the judiciary, we're the fulcrum.
That's really good. And Judge, I heard you speak before at Florida Memorial University to our young men, our football players and basketball players and baseball players. And I saw the way they looked at you when you stood up and you told your story and you spoke with so much, so much authenticity. And I saw the smiles on their faces, and I could imagine someone like yourself who's fair and just, and you actually care. When a young Black man walks into your courtroom, I could imagine them knowing that they'll get a fair shake out of you. And so thank you, Judge. And I think that was a very powerful answer. I do want to ask Commissioner Hardiman and Mayor Harris a question. The House and the Senate did not pass the George Floyd Act on the federal level yet. And as some people argue that justice delayed is justice denied. But given the governmental makeup of this country, the local government does not wait on the federal government to enact policies or laws. So what are we doing on a local level to address police reform? And that's for Commissioner Hardiman or Mayor Harris, whoever goes first.
Who you want to go first?
We could do a rock, paper, scissors, shoot. I don't mind.
It doesn't matter. I guess I've already spoken, so I'll go first. Here in Miami Gardens, keeping our residents safe is our top priority, and making sure that our residents and our police department have the tools that they need to make sure that things are running and doing the right thing. So as a municipality with the highest African-American population in the state of Florida, we work every day to establish practices and trainings for our police officers and law enforcement officers. And some of the recent efforts that we have put in place, we tried to hire as many officers as we possibly can who live, work, and play right here in Miami Gardens. And by doing that, what happens is your neighbors are the people who are policing you. And some of them, they understand the neighborhood, they understand what's going on here in the community, and they take pride here in our area. We recently became an accredited police department, which allowed the agency to conform to standards and operate up to par. We updated our policies to include the banning of chokeholds and things of that nature, and we added de-escalation and high liability trainings. And our officers also go through implicit bias trainings. So there's a lot of things that we've done in the city of Miami Gardens, and a lot of our officers look like the makeup of our city. And so that's where we started at, and that's where we'll continue. We got a great relationship with our police chief. We're doing some other things that we'll go into a little bit later on, but that's where we started at, and that's what we're doing. And our police department has become, to me, one of the best police departments in the Miami-Dade County area, if not the state of Florida. So we'll continue to work with them. And I guess because of my background in juvenile delinquency, we sit down and we have conversations with them about how we want our kids to be handled. We sit down and talk to them about how people should be treated with respect and dignity. And we also talk to our residents and through our citizens academies on how our police need to be respected as well.
Good. Thank you, Mayor Harris, and I appreciate you sharing that. I work in the great city of Miami Gardens as a professor at Florida Memorial University. So I spend a lot of time in the city. I eat there. I'm at Lorna's all the time. And so, you know, and it's really heartening to know all of the great changes that are happening. I would like to go to Commissioner Hardiman. He sees things from a county level, and I'm actually in his district. And so, Commissioner Hardiman, what are we doing on the local level to address police reform?
Well, the first thing I think you should think about is that not just in Miami-Dade County, but we have different municipalities that are doing different things. So, you know, Mayor Harris described what's happening in Miami Gardens. And I think that's a wonderful thing to talk about, because Miami Gardens represents the largest number of Black folk in South Florida. And that's not a small task. I always try to explain to people when they compare and contrast what happens, for instance, in the city of Miami, the district that I represent as the District 5 Commissioner, where I represent the largest number of Black people within my community. Our numbers pale in comparison to what Miami Gardens represents. However, I think we have things that Miami Gardens doesn't have in such close proximity, such as public housing, lower income individuals, a number of different issues that make it more complicated, I would say, to solve some of our problems in the city of Miami. And then we have a high population of Spanish speakers and the interaction between the Spanish folk and Black people in South Florida. And so in the city of Miami, has had a storied past dealing with people of color. Back in the day, it was a racist police department. I mean, the Ku Klux Klan was instrumental in running the department. And so that's a reality. Today, it's not so much. Today, it is not overwhelmingly that way. I think our former police chief, he had the highest number of Black, what you would call, Major Simmons, they're not executive, but staff officers than anyone ever before. And that was monumental. And that was on the heels of us really closing out our Department of Justice oversight. Because there was a time when there was a certain number of police shootings involving Black men that the Justice Department said that there was a pattern and practice of discrimination and some other issues within the police department. And so the police department in the city of Miami became under that sort of supervision. And finally we came out of that. And that's important to really talk about, because how police officers treat people of color in their neighborhoods is of extreme importance to the health and vitality of the people who live there. And so today you have a new police chief in the city of Miami. And that police chief has done like what the former police chief has done, and he's made decisions about employment of officers that have stepped outside of the bounds of what I would call professional responsibility. And so I always tell people that law enforcement officers are first professional. In any profession that you have, where you have to acquire some sort of skill or certificate to serve, you have to act within a certain degree of reasonableness, a degree of precision in what you do. So if you're a professional football player, for instance, and your job is to run a 4.6, then you must run somewhere near that 4.6. If you begin to run a 6.4, you're probably going to be fired. If you're a doctor and you're a surgeon, you have surgeries, and you begin to act outside of really the degree of preciseness that you should, you can't sew a straight line, you're probably not going to be a doctor for very long. Same thing in the practice of law and in all other professions. And so when officers step outside of their level of responsibility, then they should be removed. Major Simmons knows that to become an officer is not very easy. I mean, one of the things you have to do is pass a physical examination. And so you have to be physically fit. And most officers are physically fit when they join the force. Unfortunately, for some officers, 20 years later, they are not so physically fit. And so the question becomes, does an officer who is not physically fit have a higher propensity to fire his weapon if he's challenged by someone on the street? I can't give you that positive answer, but you would probably dare to believe that if you felt that you were less capable of defending yourself, you'd be more likely to use force that we would think would be unreasonable for the circumstances. And that sort of thing sort of happens. And so in the city of Miami, just like in Miami-Dade County, we have police oversight boards. In the city of Miami, the budget for the police oversight board of civilian investigative panel is linked, if you will, pegged to the police department's budget. So it grows as the police department budget grows. In Miami-Dade County, we also have a police oversight board that was, I would dare to say, brought back to life, but it's still on life support. And what that means is that it still requires funding. It still requires other commissioners to make further appointments to the board so it can get up and running. And what Major Simmons talked about, and she said, look, you have to complain. You have to get into the process of going to a police department and filing a complaint. It doesn't always go our way. It's never ever fair, but you have to make it happen, right? You have to start that process. And in organizations that work with the community, I think should really focus on that as well, educating the community about how you go about the complaint process, encouraging them to follow through with it, because that is the only way, that is the only way you can really begin to affect the employment of officers who are bad actors. And unless they do something that is so outrageous, they're not going to be removed from their position. And it's interesting because remember now, the police department is a band of brothers and sisters. And so they protect themselves. And so it is a difficult battle when you're talking about complaining about an officer and expecting some decision to come forward from that. But then the laws of the state of Florida, the bargaining agreements, all protect officers in their conduct. I'll give you one small example, then I'll relinquish the mic. In criminal law, an officer can lie to you to get you to incriminate yourself. They can tell you a fancy story to make you believe that what they're telling you is the truth, and you will give them information. What I found is that many times the information, especially when you deal with juveniles, that they give you is not always the truth. It's what they were coerced to say, because many of them are afraid, many of them don't know what the next step is, many of them are just not prepared for that interaction with police officers. And officers are rewarded by that because that person is arrested, and now that person needs to fight in the criminal justice system. And juries find it very difficult, and even judges, to understand why someone would incriminate themselves or confess to something that they did not do. But fear is a mighty, mighty source of power in a person's body, and it causes them to do things that they would not normally do. And so individuals, we don't have the ability to lie to officers in that way. We're not rewarded by giving mistruths. In fact, when a police officer writes down your statements and it is a lie, it is thought to be the truth. And if you ever were to try to defend yourself in court, you'll find that prosecutors will try to impeach you with your own testimony, which makes you look like a liar, which doesn't go well before the judge or the jury. And what I always found was disheartening when I found that officers who are willing to not be truthful in court. And I mean, this is a question I will pose to the judge if I'm allowed to, but how is it that you handle the testimony of officers that you believe are not being very forthright? I know judges don't really admonish them, but how is it that you go about your decision making when you see an officer seems to have stretched his story?
You have to be intellectually honest with yourself. And that's one of the things I am on the faculty for New Judges College. And I tell them, you call it as you see it. You simply call it as you see it. And because many of us, worked either in the public defender's office or the prosecutor's office before taking the bench, and we've had contact with these officers in our prior lives. And they bring that over to the new life on the bench. And I tell them, no, regardless of the relationship you had before, sitting here and now, I don't find the testimony credible. And I tell them that the law enforcement officers will learn to respect you. They don't have to like you. They'll just learn to respect you. And that's where perspective comes in. My perspective on life is different from my colleagues. I was doing things and I had the opportunity to do things in the inner city of Brooklyn that they didn't have an opportunity to do. So when these young men and young ladies come before me, the streets, I'm comfortable in the streets. I understand it. So when things are said or done, I'm not gasping for air because it's not unreasonable to me. So I tell them, don't be intellectually dishonest. Call it as you see it.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Judge, and thank you, Commissioner Hardiman, for your answer. And I actually meant to say I host a lot of events in your district. I don't live there, but I host a lot of events there. But very good answer. I want to ask a question for everyone, and we are close to the end of times for this event. And so it's like Armageddon. We are close to the end of this event, and I want to respect your time. So let's do a rapid response for this question. I'm going to start with Major Simmons. There's a lot being said about what is not being done between the Black community and law enforcement, but changes happen internally that we don't hear about. So what has been done on the inside in your line of work that the public doesn't know about?
So I'll be remiss if I don't mention the work that I've done with Judge Prescott as well as Commissioner Hardiman. I've personally been in Judge Prescott chambers. I've went to Commissioner Hardiman's office where we discussed the concerns within the law enforcement standpoint of what were the issues that we're facing and how we can better address working directly with the community and law enforcement. But from a Dade Chief's perspective, they are the organization that holds the glue together for all law enforcement municipalities within Miami-Dade County. And last year they did something that was pretty remarkable. They passed a resolution called 8 Can't Wait that was signed out by all chiefs and directors in Dade County with our past president, Major De La Espadilla, who brought together all the agencies. And one of the things that was banned was chokeholds and some other priorities within our agencies in a community. And most recently, a conversation was started with Dr. Shirley Plankton in the Miami-Dade County Community Relations Board, where we're kind of creating that conversation that needs to be had, that even though it's in its infancy stages, it's a collaboration between the Dade County Association Chief of Police, which is comprised of all municipalities and agencies in Dade County, and the Community Relations Board, in a help to kind of build the relationships and gaps between Pinecrest, Miami, all agencies in Dade County together, and kind of making the community and law enforcement coming together as a party. And that's the behind the scenes thing that's being worked now. And lastly, our newly elected president, Chief Renee Landa, just started the Community Relations Board, which I'm a part of. Reason I'm here today to just kind of start that conversation with organizations just like you guys to just kind of get us on the right path of working together cohesively between the community and law enforcement.
Excellent. Thank you, Major Simmons. You mentioned Dr. Shirley Plankton. I do a lot of work with her. She is incredible. And so thank you for the work that you're doing. I'm going to go to Judge Prescott on what has been done inside your line of work the public doesn't know about.
I apologize. I didn't hear you. Repeat that, please.
Yeah. What has been done inside your line of work in relation to the Black community and law enforcement that the public doesn't know about?
There's a lot of collaborative work that goes on behind the scenes that the community does not know about. As Major Simmons said, she can call my office anytime and have a meeting and we can get together. And there are a lot of initiatives that are begun behind closed doors here in Dade County that it's not for the media, because we're not doing it for glory. We're doing it for the families and the children that we serve. When we see that things need to get done, we get them done. Sometimes it takes a little longer than others. As the administrative judge, there's a program that's called the Delinquency Work Group. And I'm fond of saying, when you come around the table, there's nothing that we can't get done. And when I call a delinquency work group meeting, I'm talking about the Public Defender's Office, State Attorney's Office, DCF, the Probation Office, We get to the table, we discuss issues that affect our community, and we come up with an answer. It doesn't have to be dictated to us. There's no mandate that has to come down from the state of Florida for us to do it. We get it done here. So that's what the community does not do. They don't get to see the behind the scenes work of the collaboration that we have going on. But there is a great collaboration here in Dade County.
That's really really good to know. Thank you, Judge, for the answer. Let's go to Mayor Harris.
And I echo the same sentiments that Judge Prescott says. That, you know, I go before Judge Prescott, and I think Judge Prescott is probably the fairest judge that you could ever want to be before. You know, he's going to be fair. He's going to ensure that those kids get the proper services that they require. And one thing I enjoyed being a part of with Judge Prescott was the fact that we went out through the communities in the past and we let them know the whole process of the juvenile justice system and how from the beginning all the way to the end, from when a kid comes in on an intake basis and goes through the whole probation piece. That was very effective, and I would love to do that again, Judge, if you ever in the position to do that. We could do that again. But some of the things that I think that they don't realize in Miami Gardens that our police departments are doing. We have what we call a real-time crime center that we put in place. And through the real-time crime center, we're able to pinpoint crimes that's taking place immediately. And then we're able to get our police officers to those points and to those places within a short amount of time. Again, we talked about hiring our local police officers from here in our community, as well as doing some other things like the walk-in one-stop. Our police officers, they go door to door with Miami-Dade County, and they go door to door to promote wellness and awareness on numerous topics such as domestic violence. They educate the public on crime prevention strategies and meet the community and address their concerns. We have Big Brothers and Big Sisters programs and the Bigs and Blue program, and the program matches police officers with little kids, and then the children who are in need of mentors and guidance, they get those services. And we also have our Police Explorers program where our young adults who are interested in law enforcement careers, they receive training and practices and practical experiences and things of that nature so that if they decide they want to be police officers, they can be. And we also do what we call Coffee with a Cop. And that's just what it says. The police officers go out, have coffee with the community and get to know our residents, as well as our residents getting to know our police officers. So there's collaborations that are taking place throughout Miami-Dade County, throughout Miami, throughout Miami Gardens, throughout the entire Miami-Dade County area that a lot of people may not know about, and they need to capitalize on those things. And I think that'll help to make our community a better place to live.
Wow. Thank you, Mayor Harris. That's really, really insightful. Thank you. I appreciate that. And lastly, Commissioner Hardiman, please share with us rapidly what has been done inside your line of work the public doesn't know about.
It's interesting because all of us really do work together.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. Another thing I have to make a comment about, when Judge Prescott said that, you know, defendants they smile when they come into the courtroom. I remember the first time I walked into his courtroom, I smiled, right? As a defense attorney. And
so did I.
and what's interesting about that experience is that I didn't expect to be treated better in his courtroom. In all actuality, I expect to be treated with a certain level of expectations that would have been higher even than other people in the courtroom. I didn't want to disappoint him. I didn't want to disappoint my client. You know, I really wanted to give the best representation that I could. And so we hold each other accountable. And all of our police departments and all of our interactions are really meant to get to the bottom of what's happening in our neighborhoods. And so if I talked about what's going on, for instance, in Miami-Dade County, I mean, there's probably more than 25 programs, from everything from Coffee with the Cops, Citizens Police Academies, Community Service Squads, DARE, gang detectives, gun bounty programs. I mean, we have commanders, we have all kinds of people that are in the community, sometimes more than the community members themselves. You will be surprised how much time a law enforcement officer is dedicated to her community or his community, not only during their time when you would typically say they would work a normal 10-hour day, 12-hour day, but even beyond that, because they're at all the activities, and you see them in their uniforms. They come to all of the events. You know, there's an incredible amount of commitment for neighborhood resource officers and such like that who are invested within our neighborhoods. And you know, once a child gets arrested, for instance, and you look at what the public defender's office does, or what the TAP program does, or what the judge does, and the programs that the judges assign them to, and the level of follow-up and follow-through with these kids, I mean, it is amazing. It is heartening, if you will. Unfortunately, what makes the television are the people who are in our community who are saying you're not doing enough, right? It makes much more sense for ratings for them to say the elected officials aren't doing enough, the judges aren't doing enough, the police officers aren't doing enough, when in fact they're doing so much. If we weren't doing what we're doing, there would be so many more children that would have fallen victim to not only gun violence, but also the system. And that's just the flat out truth. And so, you know, I'm excited to be a part of this solution in helping our children. It is a lot of work. It is difficult, it is hard. There's a tremendous amount of resources that go into it, but we all believe that it is worth it. And so none of us would be in these jobs if we didn't believe that investing in our children and our futures is worth it. And so if you don't know what's happening in Miami-Dade County, it's not your fault. It's just that there's so much stuff that's going on that it is impossible for you to know about everything that's happening. Even as a leader within the community, I will tell you that a police officer will walk up to me and say, well, we have a program that does X, Y, and Z. I didn't know about that program. I have somebody that's perfect for it, because there's just so much out there that's worthy of being praised. And what you only get are the things that people just find, I guess, better for them to kind of discuss. But there are a lot of resources out there, and all you have to do is just reach out to the police department, reach out to the commissioner's offices, and let us help point you in the right direction.
So, Commissioner Hardiman, I think that's a great segue to our very last question. I mean, you spoke about this earlier when you first shared your experience. And so, being that this is the Black Male Media Project, and this is the National Association of Black Journalists of South Florida, I think it's important that when you turn the camera around and look at us as journalists, and although I'm not a journalist, I'm a professor of communications, but the journalists put a camera on ourselves to know what can we do better. And I think you gentlemen who I could imagine have been in the news too many times to count, and then also Major Simmons, if you have as well, I'd love for you to answer this question rather quickly, because I do want to respect their time, but it's important to ask. So we do aim to speak about how we are portrayed in the media. For those of you on this panel who garnered media attention, what are your thoughts on how you are portrayed in the media, and what can the media do better when portraying you to the public? And so, Commissioner Hardiman, I'll start with you because you've been the most vocal on this subject. And then I'll go Judge Prescott, Mayor Harris, and then Major Simmons.
I think it's important to ask fair questions. Give both sides of the story. Many times when you look at, for instance, in law enforcement, if you read a arrest affidavit, you're guilty. Not any person would be not guilty in the United States of America if you read an arrest affidavit. I mean, the way that it would describe you is in the crime that you committed, you couldn't possibly have a defense for it. And I think that's what happens in the media. In the media, I found that they describe a set of facts that is someone's perspective. And they don't do a good job of presenting another perspective. And I think when you don't do that, it's not fair, especially to someone who's an elected official who doesn't have redress of law when people spread lies about them. right? If you're in the private sector, professor, and someone accuses you of doing something that's wrong, it's very easy for you to file a slander or libel lawsuit against them to defend your good name. But it's not so easy if you're an elected official. If you're a person in the public realm, and you'll hear people say, well, if it's not true, then why don't they sue? Why don't they do something about it? Well, because you're going to lose. And that's just how it is for public officials. And so I think the media has a responsibility of presenting good information, not just things that are going to sell them papers. I'll give you one quick example. I remember once where someone stated that they called my office and they wanted to schedule a meeting to meet with me. And instead, they met with someone else who was a part of my family. That's what my office set that meeting up. It was a bold-faced lie. The lie was so big that the attorney who represented the person who made that statement said to the judge, that did not happen. I never called his office. As the attorney who set it up, I set up a certain meeting with someone outside of government, and I had them meet there. The media never retracted the statement. The media never put back on the front page of the paper that what was said was not true, and that the lawyer, white lawyer, who represents that person, because the white man says it's always true, right? If the white lawyer who represented that person said that that statement was not true. And that's sort of unfair treatment that I would get as a Black elected official in South Florida, that it's just not right, because what it is meant to do is to destroy my reputation.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Judge?
I agree. The focus should not be on being the first to say it. The focus should be on getting it right. And then in those instances where it may have been printed and it was incorrect, correct it. Give it the same energy to correct it as you did with the falsehood. That's my input.
Thank you, Judge. Thank you. Mayor?
Yeah, and as it relates to us, we're always in the media about something negative when it may not even be our city. It may be somewhere else. Just past week, when they had the event in Hialeah, the media reported, hey, it's Miami Gardens, and that wasn't us. Mm-hmm. And so they need to retract things like that. And I think they need to be able to get the whole story right and then talk about the facts, and not just, like Judge Prescott said, don't just come out there to be the first to tell the story. Get the facts right first before you run into telling the story and covering the city. We are doing so many great things here in Miami Gardens. I just left 3 of our parks, and our parks got over a couple of thousand people on those parks right now, and doing some great things at those parks. Hurricane giveaways and things like that in our community. And there's no media there to promote the positive things, but let there be a shooting close by Miami Gardens and it becomes a Miami Gardens problem. So I think what the media has to do is to get the whole story and all the facts right before they start covering stories like that.
Thank you, Mayor Harris. Thank you. I appreciate that. And Major Simmons?
I want to just kind of echo their sentiments to have more positive interactions between the community and police, because this will actually stop the fear of the community feeling as though if I talk to police, I'm snitching, and members of the community will be more inclined to share information when shootings or things happen in their area, because they are seeing the police in a positive light. If we're always just showing negative things in the police, negative this, negative that, I wouldn't want to share either or give information because of a fear of what I've seen on TV or anything portrayed out with police in a negative light.
Yeah, very good. And I'm really glad I asked that question, because I think it's a well-needed admonishment. And we definitely, the journalists in NABJ-South Florida, I'm sure they're taking this to heart. And so I appreciate you all sharing this. I must say, this was a great panel. I received a text message from a whole bunch of people saying, this panel is amazing. We have Janae Tate of High Low News. She said this panel was so good and very informative. I'm glad I tuned in and watched the entire live panel. Someone else said, I agree with Janae, this has been great. And so the reviews on Rotten Tomatoes is 100%. We did a phenomenal job. And so I would like to thank you, Major Simmons, Commissioner Hardiman, Mayor Harris, and Judge Prescott for your time. I know your time is very valuable, and the fact that you are spending it with us, we deeply appreciate it. And so thank you so much. And we're bringing back to the stage Yanatha, who's known as a modern day Renaissance man. I'm professor of entrepreneurship at Miami-Dade College and also an award-winning filmmaker, to give a recap on this conversation before we close out. So again, thank you again to the panel, and Yanatha, you have the floor.
Thank you, Jefferson. And thank you again to the panel. Big lies garner bigger headlines, right? So with our 5th annual Black Male Media Project, we are committed to going in that right direction. And Judge Orlando Prescott, I too was raised in Brooklyn. One of the things that I lived in Flatbush, right next to the Crown Heights. I lived on Hawthorne Street. And one of the things that I grew up hearing is that our word is our bond, right? Mm-hmm. So word is bond. And I've paid attention to so many things, our word in a literary sense, right? And the balance of that. Commissioner Hardin, you talked about how the headline about the truancy, they had 2 different stories, right? The white kid was in the inside while you were on the headline, just like 100 years ago. That big lie of two dead whites in this race riot in Tulsa, Oklahoma hasn't changed, right? They're not telling the whole truth, and that's, you know, going back to what Judge Orlando Prescott talked about. We need the whole truth and nothing but the truth, right? They can't handle the truth, and so, you know, with Mayor Rodney Harrison and Major Simmons, we need access. Access needs to turn into action and become active and become, you know, be proud to be called activist judges. From anger, we need to be aligned. You know, from hurting, we need some healing, to be true to ourselves. You know, when police often misspeak, you know, Judge Prescott, you know, tell them to come correct or don't come at all. You know, that duality is present in our everyday lives. And so we need to, that word again of being our bond. Our word being bond will build, you know, will help us build those bridges to keep our communities safe, to have that collaboration that Major Simmons talks about, you know, to have more positive interactions. The positive interactions give better perceptions to allow us to change things, right? Commissioner Hardin talked about that, all the positive news about the $19 million anti-poverty initiative, $400 million housing. We need to talk and acknowledge that and celebrate those things. From the STEP programs to address social changes, our collaboration is critical to conquer the crises we deal with in our communities, to make it a better place to live. We are affected by an unbalanced story, but today we're going to challenge those terrible things that happened in the past and the crazy biases we deal with in the present to make a better future. So I'll end with this. Success comes with support. We only fail in this life when we fail to uplift one another. So I want to thank you all for being a part of our 5th annual, I apologize, our 5th annual Black Male Media Project. And Major Simmons, George Prescott, Commissioner Hardin, Mayor Rodney Harris, Jefferson, Russell, and all of you that are there listening to us online or through the Zoom contact. We appreciate you all. We're thankful for your time, and thank you.
Professor, excellent recap per usual. Thank you. Also, I would like to shout out our amazing committee, our committee members, Carmen, Dramel, yourself, of course, and Yvonne. This would not be possible without you. Thank you again to Russell Motley for the welcome on behalf of our president, Juwan Strader of NBC6. And for all of you who watched, I deeply appreciate you all. Professor, again, great job. Mayor, Commissioner, Judge, Major, we appreciate you. And I encourage you all to like our Facebook page, share the video, and we're going to upload our entire conversation on YouTube on our NABJ-South Florida YouTube page. So I encourage you to watch it. And you know we will be back next year, the first Saturday of June in 2022 with the Black Male Media Project. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Take care, Jefferson.
Thank you all. Continue to inspire Black men and women. So thank you.
All right, we are no longer live. Thank you all again. Thank you all again. We appreciate you. God bless you all. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Peace and blessings.
Blessings.
All right.